As we virtue signal our way into World War III, one thing that I think is very important, no matter what your view on the war in Ukraine is, something you should know that is reality. The enemy gets a vote too. The enemy gets a vote too. So no matter what your desire or your desired outcome is, you have to understand that the enemy has capabilities and the enemy has a vote. So when they are uh, handing weapons to Ukraine, including tanks, um, I like to think about it from, let's switch moccasins for a second. Now imagine if another country we were at war with and a third party started handing that country weapons, maybe handing them intelligence, maybe helping them target us. How would we view that? Would we view that as they're not involved or they are involved in the war? Well, Russia is saying that they are. So I want to take a look at this article and then show you that video of Warhawk himself. All right, so Russian diplomats issue dire warning that war with the U.S. is close. What? No. Why would they say that? Oh, I don't know. Let's take a look. The Kremlin's top diplomats have warned that Western involvement in Ukraine is nearing the point of no return, accusing the United States and NATO bloc of attempting to transform the country into a Russia-phobic military stronghold. Meanwhile, Moscow UN envoy declared that all Russian red lines have been crossed. Now, what would those red lines be? Again, put yourself in their shoes. If another country was handing, let's say we went to war with Mexico for some reason, and Russia and China are handing Mexico armaments and using their technology to target uh, places inside the United States, how would we view that? It's not, you know, it's not rocket science. And again, no matter what your view on this is, Russia gets a vote too. So they, if they view it as an act of war, don't be surprised of the consequences. All right, reading from the article, an integral part of this policy is long-term containment of Russia, and this was the NATO policy, right? Including through the expansion of NATO towards borders, as well as transforming the fraternal Ukraine into a Russia-phobic military stronghold. This is the Russian diplomat saying this. In recent years, this line of Washington and European satellites has reached its point of no return. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Washington and several other Western states gave assurances to Moscow. Now, understand how Russia thinks about this. Assurances to Moscow that NATO alliance would not expand beyond Germany. However, in the years since, President Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump have each allowed new members to join the alliance, all of them inching closer to Russia's border. Okay. You may agree with that. You may think NATO should expand. Fine. Russia gets a vote. And Russia has nukes. It's just like you want the world to be the way you see it instead of the way it is. Russia gets a vote in this. All right, starting in 2008, NATO has repeatedly declared its intentions to someday allow Ukraine to become a member, again reiterating that pledge at recent alliance summit. The move would cross the brightest of all red lines for Moscow, as was previously noted by the State Department officials and current CIA Director William Burns, who penned a 2008 memo warning of the geopolitical perils of extending membership to Kiev. Why do you think Russia invaded Ukraine? What would we have done in the same circumstances? Doesn't mean Russia's a good guy, but it does mean that they're a nation who gets a vote. And to pretend like they don't have the tech to really hurt the United States is naive. Last week, the Washington Post reported that Ukraine relies on American intelligence for selecting targets. Since the start of the year, the White House has authorized the shipment of main battle tanks and long-range rockets to Kiev. Additionally, NATO appears to be preparing to send Western-made warplanes to Ukraine. It means that NATO is not only providing weapons, but also choosing the targets for Ukrainian strikes. Would you view that as an act of war if the moccasins were reversed? He went on to allege that citizens from NATO countries are already fighting, as well as getting captured and killed in Ukraine. We know this from the people that we have captured, from the bodies that we see on the battlefield, the ambassador said of the Western weapons. Said Western weapons would only escalate the conflict, even warning that foreign intervention could eventually trigger a nuclear war. Now, this could be saber rattling. Could not be saber rattling. Okay, how would we view it if the situation was reversed? Further reading, it's absolutely clear that all deliveries of weapons to the zone of conflict, of course, is like pouring oil into the fire, he said, adding, if you are dealing with a nuclear power, and if you are citing the goal of inflicting defeat to this nuclear power, you should have all the options in mind of our possible response, including de-escalation. What does winning look like with a nuclear power? We played this before with the USSR. Played this game before. What does winning look like with a nuclear power? In our fantasy land, does it look like Vladimir Putin going, my bad, sorry about that, and retreating? What does it look like? Again, Russia gets a vote. These are both diplomats from Russia. In their remarks, both diplomats also pointed out the potential American involvement in the destruction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Last week, investigative journalist Seymour Hersh published a bombshell report claiming Washington planned the bomb of the pipelines. Fairly aggressive on our part if we did. The White House has denied that it had any part in sabotaging the line, though Senator Mike Lee later acknowledged it was possible. On Wednesday, Polyanitsky said that Moscow requested a UN meeting next week to address the Hersh report. Lavrov rejected denials of the Biden administration, saying that the West is lying and hiding the truth about its terrorist attacks on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, just like they lied about the Minsk agreements. Now, what were the Minsk agreements? Well, when Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, we came to kind of a stalemate, saying we weren't going to expand. And then, a couple months ago, former German Chancellor Angela Merkel claimed that the Minsk agreements, which was ostensibly meant to end the civil war in Ukraine, was really intended to give Kiev time to build up its military. In a December 1 interview with Der Spiegel, Merkel said that she believed that during the Minsk talks, she was able to buy time that Ukraine needed to better fend off a Russian attack. Do you understand what Russia's doing now? Do you understand that they are looking at the West as an aggressor in this fight? And that doesn't mean that Russia is good, again, but it means that Russia gets a vote. It means that Russia is its own nation. And if they say, here's our line in the sand, here's our agreement, whether it's the Minsk agreements, whether it's the NATO agreements that we wouldn't expand east, and yet we still expand and we keep poking the bear, and then Russia goes, okay, I mean, it's your call, you're doing it. Now watch this video. This is from Trump's former Secretary of Defense, I believe.
NATO summit that Ukraine and Georgia should be brought on a fast track toward NATO membership. This is the answer to the question, what do you do with the gray zone countries? In Central Europe, it's Belarus, Moldova, and Ukraine. NATO has accepted as members everybody else up to that frontier, but there's a gap between NATO's eastern border and Russia's western border. And Bush said, let's answer the question. We're going to bring certainly Ukraine and Georgia as well and the Caucasus into NATO, and that will close the border question. And Germany and France objected. It was a big mistake. 4 months later, Russia invades Georgia. I mean, you don't get many laboratory experiments in international affairs, but this showed what happened by not taking the next logical step and bringing those countries into NATO, because neither the Soviet Union nor Russia have ever crossed the NATO border with armed forces, never once. That's why today Finland and Sweden want to join NATO, because they know that the only real defense is to have a NATO border with Russia.
They know at this point that that will upset Russia, that Russia will see that as a threat.
Yeah. And what would Russia do about that threat? Would they cross the NATO border and risk war with NATO? The answer Finland and Sweden have just given us is they don't think so. I think you can make a very strong case there would not have been a Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014 or a Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 if we had brought Ukraine into NATO quickly, or it was clear they were coming into NATO quickly. You leave a gray zone in between, as we did, unfortunately, you leave room for trouble.
Where does the responsibility lie for that?
I think the responsibility going back to 2008 lies very clearly with France and Germany. Just like I think the crisis Europe has today with energy lies with France and Germany. The idea that you could, by increasing trade with Russia and not being threatening, that you'd have a greater chance for peace in Europe.
Okay, so obviously that's John Bolton, who's part of the neocon kind of expansionary NATO mindset. And I'm not saying that NATO expanding isn't a good thing. I'm kind of neutral on it. But what I am saying is Russia gets a vote. We act like we're in this vacuum where we can just say, hey, Russia, you have your interests and we have ours. And you say we can't expand into Ukraine. We say we can. And the result will be we all live happily ever after. That's not how it works. And how would we react? Again, this has happened in the past. How would we react if Russia was putting their weapons closer to the United States? How would we react? And why is Russia not allowed to react the same way we would? I don't get it. I really don't. And so when we're looking at foreign policy, I'm by no means, people look at it and they're like, well, there's these classified briefings that I'm not keen to. And, um, who knows what's going on over there? Here's the facts. We said we wouldn't expand east. We did. We said, we stated our intent that we wanted Ukraine to be part of NATO, which is right on the border of Russia. So, if you were in Russia, would you look at that as a sign of aggression? I would. So, are we surprised that Russia reacts the way it does? And then again, the question you should ask is, what does victory look like? What does victory look like with a with a nuclear power? I don't know. It's a fantasy world to think that Russia's just going to, give us a high five and let's let bygones be bygones. They have nukes. Seems like we're poking the bear, especially with the allegations of Nord Stream 2. But yeah, what's the end game here? I don't know. I really don't. Seems like we want it. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.